Good morning, everyone. Welcome to A Connect Online. This is episode 5. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all joining this meeting today from. For me, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. Today, we have a very special guest, the member for Berowra, Julian Leeser, and he's going to share with us some of his thoughts about telecommunications issues in his electorate. Over to you, Julian.
Well, thanks so much, Teresa. Can I acknowledge you and the wonderful work that ACAN does? And can I also acknowledge the Darug and Guringai people who are the traditional owners of the land on which my electorate sits, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Telecommunications is the number one issue in the Berowra electorate. I sensed this even before I became a member of parliament, because I was a party activist before I became a member of parliament. And I remember door knocking in Arcadia in about 2014. I became a member of parliament in 2016, and hearing from people about how their mobile phone technology was just completely unreliable. On becoming the member of parliament, we promised to put up 3 mobile phone towers under the Black Spot program, one at Sackville North, one on the Brooklyn Dangar Island area, and one also in Crosslands Reserve. Over the course of my first term, we did seem to have a significant number of mobile phone complaints, and in fairness to the telecommunications companies, every time we would escalate it with them, they deal with these issues. But very often we saw what they were doing is patching a problem, responding to the itch, not dealing with what were effectively the major systemic issues in my electorate. So following my re-election in 2019, we did a bit of an audit of all the complaints we had, and we saw that there were about 400 complaints across the electorate about telecommunications, particularly about mobile phone reception. We then went out to our community and said, look, tell me about the black spots that you're facing. We got a further roughly about 600 complaints, so we're up to roughly 1,000 complaints. And we talked to the local RFS and SES. The Berowra electorate, for people that don't know, stretches from the M2 in the south to the Hawkesbury River in the north. It includes major population centres like Cherrybrook, like parts of Hornsby and the edge of Castle Hill. It's very much in metropolitan Sydney. But it's got these semi-rural areas, and it's got the area on the Hawkesbury River. And it is quite disaster prone. We've had events over the years where the bushfires have come through, particularly in 2002. That's the last major bushfire event in my electorate, but also the recent Hawkesbury River floods cut people off for several days. And we've had hailstorms and various storms. And indeed, at the end of 2019, there was a significant, 2018, there was a significant series of storms that waterlogged communications, as there was at the end of 2019 as well. And then COVID hit, and people were, for the first time, put under lockdown, trying to run their businesses from home, trying to stay in touch, trying to run their schooling. And this became a burning issue in the electorate. And I felt that the telecommunications companies just weren't really interested in our electorate. And so we ran a series of campaigns. We got people to sign a petition. I went out into the media and said, look, this is ridiculous. This is Australia's major city. This is a right. My view is that telecommunications, like water and electricity, is a right. It's not a privilege. It's a fundamental and essential service for people. And yet what people were facing in my electorate was worse telecommunications than they had 20 years ago when they had fixed line phones. People rely on their mobile phones to make calls. People rely on their mobile phones and their internet to receive data. And they just were not able to do that. And so in the context of the lockdowns that occurred in 2020, and again, the lockdowns we're seeing this year, you've got people who can't run their businesses, who can't study, who can't deliver education courses. We've got people going up to the local McDonald's. We've got people who are, having to go up the hill. We had a situation where in the first lockdown, one of the doctors who was involved in the major COVID response for the Northern Sydney region couldn't make calls in his home, couldn't get calls in his home, and had to go up and make these quite confidential calls in the middle of his street. We had a senior public servant involved in one of the major state service delivery areas who, again, could not communicate with the Premier of New South Wales and her senior and her secretary in her own department because of the appalling telecommunications. But it's also, on a bad day, a matter of life and death. We've had situations in our community where people have been bitten by a snake. They were not able to call 000. The only way they could get on was to send an email to somebody in another city to get them to call 000. We've had a situation where somebody was having a heart attack, the ambulance came, and because of the lack of phone reception, the paramedics couldn't communicate with the cardiologist at the hospital to ensure that they were doing the right thing, that the readings from the defibrillation machine were going through to the relevant cardiologist. Telstra is the monopoly provider for large parts of my electorate, particularly the sort of semi-rural areas and the areas on the Hawkesbury River. And there are people that are paying Telstra's bills and not getting any service. Telstra says that these places have coverage. In nobody else's language do these places have coverage other than Telstra. Telstra says it's coverage if you can make a call from the dog kennel in the backyard, but that's not what anybody means by coverage. People mean by coverage what we used to be able to do with the fixed line phones, which is make a call from the main living areas of our homes. And that's the service I think Australians, particularly people living in metropolitan Sydney, deserve. I've been talking about these issues to my colleagues too, and it's not just metropolitan Sydney, it's every capital city in these peri-urban areas where mobile phone communications is a problem. And I've been talking a lot to Paul Fletcher about these issues as well, and I was delighted as a result of the campaign that we've launched in my community and in other communities to get Telstra to do better, that the government has announced in the recent budget the Peri-Urban Mobile Program, a specifically targeted mobile black spot program to deal with some of these peri-urban mobile black spots. Because the mobile black spot program in the past largely hasn't served our communities, and we found that the telecommunications companies won't actually apply for them. And even when they do apply, I mentioned I'd had 3 towers in 2016, only one of those towers have been built. The other one is currently before council for approval, and it's my hope that tower will be approved. But the third one is in the too hard basket. And this third one is in an area where children go camping with scout camps and school camps. It's a proposed location because we know that there have been incidents there where it's taken people 5 to 10 minutes to drive from where the campsite is to a place where they can get reception. Now, in an issue of life and death at a campsite, if somebody's had an accident on the water, or imagine there's some burns as a result of somebody getting too close to the campfire, or a snake bite, every minute can count. And so the idea that you can do something in metropolitan Sydney and not have a adequate mobile phone reception is an anathema to me. The more I look at these issues, the more I think that that the telecommunications regulatory architecture is not serving communities like mine. I want to say something about the NBN before I talk a little bit about what I'm intending to do here. The NBN serves, well, most of the people in my community, but there are, in the Berowra electorate, technologies of all type, satellite, fixed line and fixed wireless. Those technologies work very well for many people, but for some people they do not work at all. In a couple of locations, in one in particular in Galston, there is fixed wireless technology. In the street where the fixed wireless technology is, the person who has the fixed wireless tower on their own premise cannot get NBN reception, despite the fact that we've had the most senior NBN technician and indeed the NBN CEO coming to visit that street. There are other locations in that street that cannot get it. I think our job as government is to provide people the services that they rely on. Now, if people cannot use fixed wireless and cannot get any reception, and indeed satellite is not possible because of the tree canopy in that area, then we really have to think about converting some of that fixed wireless in outer metropolitan areas to fixed line. I've got to say I support the government's broad NBN settings. There are vast tracts of Australia that it would be silly to cover with fixed line. But we're not talking about the outer Barcoo here. We are talking about metropolitan Sydney, and we're talking about technologies, be they mobile phone towers or the NBN, that as we roll out things like the Internet of Things will become increasingly important and are already absolutely vital services in people's lives. Even in a non-COVID context, the way which we work has changed completely. And we want to incentivise and allow people where they want to run a business or they want to work from home to be able to work from home in metropolitan Sydney. As I say, I think we need to reorient the telecommunications regulations in this country to focus more on consumers. And I've learnt so much from my interactions with ACAN on this point. I'm preparing a private members bill with colleagues to be presented to the Parliament shortly that's going to do a number of things that I think will really reorient the framework of telecommunications legislation if it's picked up more broadly. The first thing is to deal with those coverage issues. To say effectively that if a telecommunications company is going to say that you have coverage, that you indeed need to have coverage, and that means coverage in a person's home like you would have got from a fixed line service. Secondly, I want to see where people are disconnected from their services for 6 hours or more, them having a holiday from their bill for that entire month. The reason is we need to put some sort of financial pressure on the telecommunications companies in order to up their customer service. There are absolutely no drivers at the moment to improve customer service for telecommunications companies. I think that much of the telecommunications architecture that we've got is a cosy co-regulatory model, where effectively the model serves the interests of the telecommunications companies and not the consumers. So although the TIO, the Telecommunications Industry Ombudsman, does some good work, I don't think the telecommunications companies will ever fear it because it is not really independent. And that's the same with ACMA. There's too many codes and not enough teeth. I want to see ACMA having the same sort of regulatory powers as the ACCC does, the power to take and enforce their legislation, not just to deal with codes and pat people on the head. So I want to see an independent ombudsman. I want to see ACMA having more legislative powers to take telecommunications companies to court. I want to see more competition in our sector, and I think one of the things that the Minister has done really well is to focus on more competition. I particularly don't want to see the idea that Telstra could purchase the NBN. I know Telstra is in a restructuring phase at the moment, but the idea that a company that is effectively a monopolist in so many services would also take the NBN as well, even in a restructured form, is an anathema to me, and it would be an anathema to my constituents who are poorly served in large places by Telstra's service generally. I want to see a range of other things. In a community like mine that is disaster prone, I want to see things like if there is a natural disaster, if lives are lost, if the telecommunications companies have been put on notice by a government authority to fix those issues, and that if a disaster comes through and because of the insufficient telecommunications, a coroner finds that person has died, then I think that the telecommunications company and their executives should be legally, financially liable for those deaths. There's some of a range of different measures that I'm putting in place. As I say, I think having an independent telecommunications ombudsman will be very helpful in terms of dealing with some of the more difficult issues that we faced, and will give people a greater sense of an ability to complain. Finally, I think we need some better customer service guarantees and a universal service guarantee for mobile phones. At the moment, the universal service obligation exists for fixed line, which fewer and fewer people are using, and pay phones, which my friend David Littleproud says are only used by drug dealers. What we need is a universal service guarantee for mobile phones. I think we made a decision recently in the last few years that effectively there was enough competition in the mobile phone market that we didn't need that. I think that's true in metropolitan areas, but it's not true in outer metropolitan areas like my electorate. In the last parts of those outer metropolitan areas, we need to have a provider of last resort so that people, wherever they live in metropolitan cities, can have a mobile phone service like the people do. I don't think that that's too much to expect. We are not Europe. We are not America. We have a different geography. We're not Singapore. And so I think in these areas we need a regulatory structure that better reflects our topography. That's not a complete list of the things that are in my private but that is a good summary, I hope, and I hope that it's something that will be of interest to ACAN and its members. I just want to again acknowledge you and to say thank you for the work that you do. We've got to make consumers the focus of telecommunications regulation in this country. I've been convinced of that the more I look at these questions, and that's certainly something I'll be fighting for. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much for that. Came a bit muffled towards just the last very few sentences.
Is that better?
Yes, much better. Okay. Ironic that you're talking about coverage and everything at the same time, but hopefully that's just a handset issue. Okay, so I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions to just dig down a little bit deeper into what you think could change. So under the current telco consumer protection rules, a telco can be penalised for non-compliance after they've breached a code. They can be directed to comply by the regulator. So does the Australian Communications and Media Authority, who've already mentioned, need greater powers to act quickly and effectively against telcos that break the rules and potentially expose consumers to harm?
Yes, I think they do. I mean, I think if you compare the other regulator in the telco sector, the ACCC, they've got much more powers to take action. And I think the telcos need to fear the regulators the way people smugglers fear Border Force. I think we've got to such a poor state of customer service and consumer focus in the telco sector that we really do need to take much tougher action. You can go to a dinner party anywhere in Sydney and mention the name Telstra, and you'll get people telling you stories. You pick up the paper any day, and there's a new story of some failure in customer service that they've done. We've given them years and years to get this stuff right. They're not going to do it alone. We need to get tough.
Okay. Just another one to dig down a little bit further about the issues that you raise in relation to customer service. Despite the current consumer protection rules, the number of complaints from telco customers remains consistently high, and the time it takes to resolve a complaint continues to increase. What do you think we need to bring consumer complaints down in telecommunications and make sure that consumers and customers are getting the service that they deserve?
Well, look, this is something that I hadn't mentioned in my presentation, but it's something that we're putting into the private members bill. I think there needs to be regular reporting in relation to telecommunications companies' annual reports of the internal complaints that are made directly to those companies about customer service. We need visibility over the amount of time people are waiting, the time between a complaint and getting a technician there, the time they have to wait for the technician. Did the technician turn up on the day they were supposed to, at the time they were supposed to, or didn't they? I mean, the amount of rage and frustration that people have about the poor service delivery, I think is much higher than almost any other service. And frankly, if we can get the state government of New South Wales to improve its service through Service New South Wales and the federal government through Services Australia, it beggars belief that we can't get the telecommunications companies to do this. So one of the ways I think is more disclosure in their annual reports by service, in terms of time, in terms of length of waiting. And then I think those figures, together with the figures that have been sent to the Telecommunications Ombudsman, need to be disclosed in a consolidated document with league tables published by the Ombudsman on an annual basis. And we need to look at the performance starting the year that any of these regulations might come in over a period of 5 to 10 years, so we can see whether the companies are actually improving their performance or not. I don't think there's any driver for executives of companies to improve performance. Their drivers are about share prices that have nothing to do with customer performance. And so I think by forcing these things to go into annual reports, by forcing internal disclosure, public disclosure of internal complaints, I believe this will help change the culture.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your work to improve things for consumers. Really appreciated by ACAN and its members.
Well, thank you. And my only words to you are more strength to your arm. Keep the great work that you do going. Continue the excellent quality submissions that you make, and keep educating my colleagues and I about the issues that so many consumers are facing right across the country.
Thank you very much.